Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. Yesterday, I ran the Free Press Marathon. I thought I'd give you a quick update on that. People have been asking me about it, and I did talk about it quite a bit in advance. So I did run the marathon and finish, and I can prove that because they gave me one of these when I crossed the finish line. So I mentioned before that I got this one last year, and I've got a few more down here as well. So I will now add this to the collection of things that you cannot see off camera. But it does say marathon finisher October 20th, 2019. In the front, of course, I don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a 57 Chevrolet Bel Air. And they like to put cars on the medals in honor of the fact that Detroit is the Motor City. Couple things that are fun to know about the Free Press Marathon. I've run it now 13 times, and I've also run a total of 18 marathons in my career. And I always keep the running number too, which I'll add. I've got a whole stack of running numbers someplace else, and I'll put some photographs up as I talk to underscore some of the things I'm telling you. But yesterday was an experience. It was kind of a long run for me. I didn't train as much as I would have liked to, and so unfortunately, I did a slow marathon. I don't know. It's not the slowest I've ever run, but it's not the fastest. But you finish a marathon. For me right now, I'm just literally just stacking them up on the resume. I don't care about the time. I keep telling myself, I should probably 1 year just really buckle down and see if I can't get back to those glory days of good times. But, things happen. I actually had a couple projects pop up this year. One or two of them I have not spoken about yet on camera, but I will. And unfortunately, one of those chewed up a bunch of time of mine and actually kept me from training as much as I would have liked. So that's my excuse. But the Free Press Marathon starts 7 o'clock. That's when the gun goes off. And then you leave in waves because there's so many thousands of people running. And so you line up in Detroit at the start line at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's actually dark and cold. I think it's 47 degrees at the start. So I was torn. The year before was so cold, I actually wore long tights and a fleece outer shell type windbreaker and gloves, and I was cold the entire race. Now, it was a little colder last year than this year, so I thought, okay, I'm going to play around with that a little bit. I wore shorts, and I wore the same fleece windbreaker, and I brought gloves with me and stuck them in my pockets in case I needed them. And the gun goes off, and then a couple waves goes out, and eventually my wave goes out, and we're cruising along. And the neat thing about the Free Press Marathon, they call it an international marathon because you actually cross over the Detroit River into Canada, and you come to the lovely town of Windsor. And so you go over the Ambassador Bridge, which is kind of neat because as you're going over the bridge, the sun is rising, and you can see Detroit and Windsor and the Detroit River. It's a beautiful, beautiful scene. And plus, it's still so early in the race, you feel good. And then you cross over the bridge, and at the far end of the bridge, I think it's about the 4 or 5 mile mark. And one of the viewers of this channel told me, said, Steve, by the way, I'm a photographer. I'll be in Canada around the 5, 6 mile mark. He goes, look for me. My name is Dan. So I actually brought a business card with me, had it tucked in my pocket. And as running down, I think it's called Riverside Drive, I saw a photographer, professional photographer, snapping pictures when he was high-fiving runners as they went by. And so as I approached him, I yelled, "Hey, Dan, is that you?" And he goes, "Yeah." And he's still just snapping away because he's trying to photograph as many people as he can. So I said, "Hey, I'm Steve Lehto, the guy from the YouTube." And he goes, "Oh," and he keeps snapping away, but he gives me the high five. But I handed him the business card just because I know that with all the thousands of runners going by, him shooting tens of thousands of photographs probably, that it's all gonna be a blur for him, much blurrier than it was for me. So I hope that he's recovered. I actually saw some of the photographs that he took because they've already got them online. And it's kind of funny, as I'm approaching him, I'm reaching in my pocket and pulling out the business card. So that was kind of neat to actually encounter somebody who said, "Steve, I will be there. I'll say hello to you as you go by." And so then after you run around in Canada, and by the way, I'm still feeling pretty good here, you run back to America through the tunnel. There's a tunnel that goes underneath the Detroit River. The tunnel is about a mile in length, and they've actually got timing mats at the front and back of it. So they actually time you how long it takes you to run the underwater mile. And the weird thing about the course is that it has basically 2 hills on it. The bridge is a pretty big hill, and the tunnel is a reverse hill. You go down and up. It's very, very strange. But it's such an unusual feature. It's fun to do. But the problem is, and I know this from my prior years running the marathon, is it's very, very warm underneath the Detroit River. Trust me on that one. And so as you're running into the tunnel, it's cold outside, 50 degrees maybe, and suddenly the temperature rises dramatically. And so I'm in the tunnel. I pull my sleeves up. I'm not wearing the gloves. I unzip my jacket and I'm trying to stay cool, and it's impossible. I got soaked, drenched in sweat. I come out the other side. Now, of course, you're back in the 50-degree weather, soaking wet. Zip everything back up again, and now, of course, it's uncomfortable, and you just lost a ton of fluids. And there's fluid stations every mile, water, Gatorade, all that. So the good news is that my support crew was going to be meeting me as I came out the far end of the tunnel. And as I approached, I said, I have a problem. I said, unfortunately, I'm overdressed now. If I hadn't gone through the tunnel, I probably could have run the race like that. But the problem is now with everything wet, it's not going to dry out. I said, so back in the car is a dry shirt and a dry, it's a vest made out of the same material as the thing I was wearing, but no sleeves. I said, is there any chance that you can go get those things for me? And she said yes. And of course, where the car is, it's a hike. I said, so here's the deal. I said, I'm going to be coming back around at the halfway mark, which will be right near here, but I'm not going to be there for about another hour. So you have an hour. Is there a chance you can go get this stuff and meet me in 1 hour at the halfway mark, the 13-mile mark? And she said yes. So I then ran around. You go by the old, former Joe Louis Arena. Joe Louis Arena is no longer where the Red Wings played for many, many years and won the Stanley Cup a few times. The building's now being torn down. It's kind of sad. But then again, of course, you also run by the old Tiger Stadium, which is long gone. Again, more sad things about how some of these buildings don't survive. And then as coming into Detroit, again, not comfortable, soaking wet, dehydrated, still trying to rehydrate, but it becomes a losing battle at some point. And so stopped, changed the shirt, put on the dry vest. I'm like a brand new guy here, brand new man. Still got 13 miles to run. So take off again, start running. And unfortunately, the Free Press Marathon, the second half is a little less visually interesting than the first half. It's a little more boring. It can get mundane. And there's a section of I forgot if it's Lafayette. I forgot the name, which street it is. But one of the streets that you run down for miles going out that way. You pass the Elmwood Cemetery where Douglas Houghton is buried. But it's a long, boring visual grind. And then you come into this place called Indian Village, which is these beautiful homes, nice, beautiful neighborhood. And the neighborhood's very supportive of the race, which is cool. All these people come out in their front lawns. They're having lawn parties and lawn chairs. They're handing out stuff, because it's October. They're handing out Halloween candy. There's people handing out beer. There was a Bloody Mary station where somebody's saying, hey, if you want a Bloody Mary, I'll mix you one right now. There is some question about whether it's wise to intake alcohol while your body's dehydrating, but I don't do that, so we don't know. And then, of course, there's a couple families, I'm suspecting they have some Polish heritage, blasting polka music, and they've got a card table where they're handing out beer. And you go down, you come around the block, and come down the other way. Now, the only sad part for me about the entire marathon is there is a guy in Indian Village who every year stands in his front yard and hands out Dixie cups filled with jelly beans. And there's something about your body as you get tired and worn out and you're weak and you're burning energy faster than you put it back in your body. There's certain things that do wonders for you. And one of them, at least for me, is jelly beans. And so I remember years ago encountering the guy with the jelly beans. And the guy goes, want some jelly beans? And it's one of those things where I remember at the time going, that appeals to me right now. So I grab a thing of jelly beans and I'm eating them as I'm doing the last block through Indian Village before you hang a right on Jefferson. And they were like, that's something that hits the spot. Every single year, I look for the guy with the jelly beans. And I actually stopped the last 2 years, reintroduced myself, shook his hand and said, sir, I just want you to know that when I think of the Free Press Marathon, all of the things that I remember about the marathon, beautiful view off the bridge, running through the tunnel, the reception you get when you come back up to the tunnel and says, welcome to America. And something to that effect. And there's lines of people screaming and yelling, and it's like, this is cool. Jelly Bean Guy is the guy that I think of the most fondly, because this is just a guy. Thought occurred to him. Every year goes up, buys jelly beans, stands in his front yard by himself, hands out jelly beans. He wasn't there this year. I hope he's okay. It might be he went inside and had to go to the bathroom because no one's helping him. I don't know, but he was not there when I went by. So I hope he's okay, and I'll look for him next year. But if anybody knows about the Jelly Bean guy in Indian Village, please shoot me a note, let me know, because I'm worried about the guy. And it was one of those things where I remember turning the corner onto his street and actually thinking to myself, the jelly beans are coming up. And they didn't. And it was kind of like a kid learning that Christmas has been canceled. So at that point, you get on Jefferson, you run about a mile, mile and a half, you hang a left, you go out across another bridge to Belle Isle, which is an island in the Detroit River. You don't run a full loop around the island, but you run about half the island. It's kind of neat. You can see Detroit off in the distance. And that's one of these things because it's in the 20s. I forgot exactly what miles you encounter on the Belle Isle, like maybe mile 21, 22. And one of the things is that as you're coming around the end of Belle Isle, you can see the Renaissance Center, General Motors headquarters. You can see the Renaissance Center. And you know that that's near the finish line, and it looks really small from where you are. Because you've got to go back onto Jefferson and run all the way down there. And it's not a straight line, unfortunately. You go down Jefferson, then you go down the Riverwalk, you run by all the marinas. And it's a nice little thing where they've got, this Riverwalk that they built in the last few years. They've made it very, very pedestrian friendly. You can walk there, hike there, bike there. And they run the marathon race down the course down there. But unfortunately for me, like I said, I didn't get as much training in as I would have liked this year. I actually missed a bunch of days, which I shouldn't have, especially late in the training. The longest run I did before the marathon was 18 miles. And I should have at least run 1 or 2 20s. And then prior to that was last year's marathon, as far as lengthy runs go. So I did a ton of running this year, 5s, 8s, 10s. But beyond a 10, I had an 18 and I think I had a 15 or a 16. But that's not enough. That's not enough. So I knew it was going to be a grind. It wasn't going to be my fastest marathon ever, obviously. Like I said, it wasn't my slowest. But just so I don't feel bad, I'm going to tell you, it was about a 5.5, a little over 5.5 chip time, meaning from when I crossed the starting line to when I crossed the finish line. They've got a little magnetic strip on your racing number, and it tracks you exactly. And of course, I was carrying an app on my phone. I use Strava, which allows me to see not only where I am on the course, how far I've run exactly, plus or minus, but with a GPS. But it also shows you your splits to how fast you're going. And I was doing my first miles in under 12s, which is, it's not setting the world on fire. But I can tell you that back in 1988, I ran the Free Press Marathon for the first time as a young man. And I'm going to put the photograph up on the screen here of me crossing the finish line. And I ran that race in a 3:45. And the thing about that is, as a young man, you don't understand these things till later. You become wise to things that you should have known earlier. And that's what wisdom is, I guess. And in my younger days, I could go out and run 8-minute miles all day long. Okay, just knock them off one after the other. Boom, 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 boom. That's the key to distance running is getting into a stride at a pace that you can maintain comfortably and just do that. You just do that. And I could do 8s all day long training. So I ran my first marathon, the first ever. I'd never run this distance before. And I did a 3:45. And I was so disappointed because if you run 8s all the way through, you'd be running a 3:30. And I actually felt like I'd screwed up. I was mad at myself. I'm like, I can't believe I didn't. And what happened was I was running 8s all the way through, and about 24, 25, I slowed down a little bit. And I slowed down enough to where I knocked it up to 3:45. Now, the 3:45, there's a gun time, meaning that the gun went off, and I crossed the line at 3:45. If they'd been using chips, which they didn't use back then, it may have been a 3:44, possibly a 3:43, but I don't know how large the field was. It was a different course back then. But the photograph of me crossing the finish line, 3:45 at the time, like I said, I was disappointed. Looking back on it now, I'm proud of that. In fact, I'll tell you right now, I've got 2 photographs in my living room that I can see on a daily basis. One of them is of Milo and Wolfie, and one of them is me crossing the finish line in 1988. And one of the reasons I put that up is not just to inspire me to go out and run, because I need the inspiration now, but it's because, to me, it's a life lesson. Because I look back on that now and go, that was an accomplishment. And at the time, I actually thought, what a lousy run. You screwed up. So there's the lesson that I've learned there myself. I will tell you that shortly after that photograph was taken, I went to California and I ran 2 marathons in California. I ran the Los Angeles Marathon. I actually ran that one twice. But I ran the Long Beach Marathon. And I ran the Los Angeles Marathon first. And that was a huge field of people. And I didn't do very well there. I ran like a 4:01. And I'm like, I'm going backwards here. And I ran the 4:01 or 4:03, something like that. And I ran that race. I was so angry at myself. I'm like, you thought 3:45 was bad. Obviously, you're going the wrong direction. I went out, buckled down, and just, I said, I am going to beat 3:45 if it kills me. Well, not necessarily, but. So I went to Long Beach, which was a flatter course, and it was a beautiful day, smaller field, ideal conditions, but a little on the hot side. And I went out, and I was smoking the course. I was on fire. I hit the halfway mark below 145, meaning that, add them together, that's 3:30. So the second course is obviously going to be, the second half is going to be slower than the first half. So I thought, I've got time in the bank now. I'm good to go. And I hit the 23-mile mark, 22-mile mark, right around there, where I was still on par to break 3:30. And it was hot. And I was probably pushing myself a little too hard. And I fell apart. Fell apart. The last mile of that race took me 20 minutes. It's the slowest mile I've ever run in my life at any 20 minutes. I ran 1 mile. You could go out right now and crawl a mile in 20 minutes almost. And I, the entire time, was looking at my watch because I started the mile at 3:21. And I thought to myself, if I could only knock off a 9-minute mile, I'd do 3:30. But I was limping, hobbling, half bent over, tunnel vision coming in, the heat, the sweat, the finish line's up there somewhere. I was on an unfamiliar course. 20 minutes to finish the last mile. And I crossed the finish line at 3:41. Now, good news, bad news. Good news is I beat my marathon time from the Free Press by 4 minutes, 3:41. And again, at that point in my life, I thought, and you screwed up. You could have dialed it back just a little bit earlier, and you wouldn't have had a 20-minute last mile. Live and learn. Don't have a photograph from that marathon, unfortunately. It was a long time ago, and you can't always get the perfect photograph as you're crossing the finish line. So the one from the Free Press, the first year I did 3:45, I've always liked that photograph. I had it in storage for the longest time and actually pulled it out recently and had it framed and mounted, like I said, in my living room. But, you know, like I said, live and learn. So the best time I had 3:41, best Free Press 3:45. Nowhere near that yesterday, but like I said, at this point in my life, you know, something I'm learning to take these things and keep them in perspective. And, you know, yesterday's my 18th marathon. And I would like to run 25 or 30 before I'm done. And I don't want to hurt my knees or my ankles, but right now I got no problems with that. So I'm mechanically, I'm sound. So that's the story of the marathon. Like I said, they gave me the medal. They gave me the shirt. Forgot to mention that. You always get a nice running shirt for running the race. I don't wear mine until after the race. Same with the medal. But there you go. So that's the update on this year's Detroit Free Press Marathon. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.